Why? Hello there. You out in the ether, watching this in the future, watching this in the present. It's actually always in the future because there's a little latency between when we stream this and you receive it. So you in the future, I hope things are better now than they were then. They might not be though. And that's why we're here today, to make your day better.
Yay.
This is The Arena. It is a show. And on this show, we discuss competitive video games, or just games in general. Hey!
Hello.
Hey, Ludo Scholar. So yeah, it's good to see you, friend. But on The Arena, we discuss competitive games. We often play and watch them as well, though we won't be doing that too much today. Because it's game design month, where we're mostly going to be kind of tackling the design of competitive games and how they differentiate each other via design, and what we can kind of glean, what we can learn from them as a result. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Eric Kirsting. I'm a PhD student at UW-Milwaukee, and I study in the English department. I'm joined by
Me. I am Janelle Malagon. I'm also a PhD student in the English department. Here to bring you some joy. Yay. Maybe. I don't know. What are we doing?
well,
Joy Town?
yeah, we're gonna hopefully have some fun, some joy. Today's just more of a discussion day, so I think that'll be that'll be fun. I'm just adding another thing to my note. Okay. Yeah, I think today's gonna be fun. So in game design month, I kind of already talked about it a little bit, but last week we covered what game did we cover last week? We covered Hearthstone, yeah. And we mostly focused on the new kind of expansion to the game and talked about like design decisions in regards to that. This week we're kind of going in a very different direction by talking about the Valve game Counter-Strike Global Offensive specifically, though the original Counter-Strike, if I recall, was a mod for Half-Life 1. But why don't we can look that up. And then there was, yeah, and then it's kind of spawned off and kind of gained its own life. Yeah, it was a mod for Half-Life developed, and then the IP for the mod was acquired by Valve. It's one of the things you'll actually see Valve do quite a bit. Like I think Valve is generally a big believer in mod culture, and so you look at something like Dota 2, which is another one of their kind of flagship properties. I mean, Dota was a mod for Warcraft 3, which wasn't even a Valve game. Like, and so, yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of history about Counter-Strike. It's definitely a competitive game. It's generally, it's kind of a precursor a little bit to the MOBA movement. Yeah, God bless the workshop. I totally agree. Everyone who's talking about that in chat. It's kind of a precursor a little bit to MOBAs because it is a 5v5 game where the players kind of fight on a map over objectives. And that's kind of similar to, something like Dota or League of Legends or these other kind of multiplayer online battle arenas. As opposed to and I would say it's worth noting that Counter-Strike is kind of a little bit of a revolutionary game in the sense of before Counter-Strike, I don't what it meant to play like a competitive shooter was very different. Because we'll see today that Counter-Strike isn't really about shooting other people. It is. That's the primary reason we play the game, right? Because we want to shoot our friends or our enemies, or shoot people with our friends. But unlike, let's say, GoldenEye, which we've played on stream, or Quake, which we've watched on stream, where the primary goal is just to accumulate kills, right? And we still see that kind of attitude in a lot of other games, like Deathmatch in Call of Duty, right? That's not like that went away. And I think you'll generally if you ever find somebody who says something went away, they're probably wrong. It's just changed a little bit. But Counter-Strike is a game that's really built around objective play, right? The goal is to protect or attack objectives and killing or taking out other players is part of the business of getting objectives, but it actually isn't the goal in and of itself, for the most part. So what's your experience with Counter-Strike, Janelle?
I really like that we started with talking about how it was a mod, because my actual experience with Counter-Strike was having to download Counter-Strike Source in order to play Gary's mod with my friends. Gary's mod, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, is like a this sandbox game. It can be anything, and there's a particular game mode in Gary's mod called Trouble in Terrorist Town that is based on Counter-Strike. And there are like hundreds of maps. It's all crowdsourced. The whole game is crowdsourced. So anything that you play with, any assets are all made and shared in the Steam Workshop. So Counter-Strike for me was just something that I had to get so that I could play something else for a very long time. And then eventually I found out about Counter-Strike Global Offensive, played a little bit, but honestly never got very into it. Something about the game just, I think there's a lot of things about it, but never really appealed to me as a consistent player.
Yeah, and that's totally, I think, reasonable, right? We're not always going to jive with particular games. I find, for me, if I were to devote a lot of time to a shooter, it would probably be Counter-Strike. Like today in 2020, I have devoted time to games like Overwatch in the past, and I have played a fair amount of Counter-Strike. I think there was like 1 month where like I played it like a couple times a week, like I was like into it, right? But I've never been like I think that's really fair. Ryan, he's associated the sound of dial-up modem with Counter-Strike, because yeah, to me, like I think of Counter-Strike and like it's this game like that was before World of Warcraft, right? It's a very storied game, for sure. And so I'm sure a lot of people who've been in gaming for a long time, like you, Janelle, or Ryan, or Leia, who's in the chat too. Wait, no, Leia isn't in the chat. PhD simulators, you, Janelle. Never. Yeah. But I'm sure a lot of us have had like run-ins with Counter-Strike, right, at some point in time because of its history. No names. Okay. Oh, I see the AKA there. Is that not on your actual thing?
No, I think it is actually there. That is part of your username, right?
Okay. Well, I can still call you Ludo Scholar. If that. Okay. And so, but yeah, so I think a lot of people have had their run-ins with Counter-Strike. I think part of it is because I think Counter-Strike is a really beautifully designed game. It stands the test of time because it's simple and complex in its execution at the same time, right? We like this summer we played games like chess and Go, and we made comparisons to things like soccer, right? Like soccer's a very simple game to some degree, right? I'm not disparaging people who love soccer. I'm not saying like you're simple-minded. I'm saying like it's a game where you have 11 people on each team. You have a soccer ball. You cannot touch the ball with your hands unless you're the goalie, and you've got to get the ball in a net, right? Like very, and then there's like some rules about offsides. But like if you can explain to somebody all the rules of soccer in like 2 minutes, that's not like a fairly complex game, right? As opposed to like even like something like a card game like Hearthstone is probably significantly more complex than just a base rudimentary understanding of the game, because you have to be like, okay, well first you have to memorize 400 cards, right? Like or whatever, right? Because the game is like changes in that way. Whereas
exactly.
with Counter-Strike, the base rules are simple, and I'm going to explain them to you, even though I'm sure you're familiar with them to some degree, but also for the audience for Game Design Month, is you have 2 teams, and they're asymmetrical. Yeah, there's a difference between rules, tactics, and strategy. Yeah, I totally agree with Ryan, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that, and that's one of my notes, right, is that like Counter-Strike has a simple premise, but it ends up becoming really, really complex the more you dive into that premise and how it impacts the game. So there are 2 asymmetrical teams in Counter-Strike. There's the counter-terrorist and the terrorist. And in competitive play, what'll happen is you'll play 15 rounds as one, and then you'll swap and play 15 rounds as the other. So like it's asymmetrical, but it's also symmetrical because you end up playing both teams, right? The terrorist job is on the map, and you'll see this. I've pulled up Dust 2, which is the most iconic Counter-Strike map by far. But this is on the stream. You'll see that there's bomb site A and B, and so the terrorists want to go to one of the bomb sites, plant the bomb, and then have the bomb explode. Alternatively, the terrorists can win by killing all of the counter-terrorists, because ipso facto, no one is there to stop them from planting the bomb. The counter-terrorists, on the other hand, have to defend both positions. And again, if they kill all the terrorists, they also win, because ipso facto, no one there to defuse the bomb, or no one there to plant the bomb, right? Interestingly, the counter-terrorists have the ability to defuse a bomb that has already been planted, which adds another layer of complexity there, right? Like the terrorists could plant a bomb, but if they die, right? And this is what we'll call that's the turn of the round, right? Is if the terrorists plant the bomb, now they're the defenders, right? As opposed, and the counter-terrorists are on offense. And so this already creates a very unique puzzle for the game, which is that the counter-terrorists have to defend two positions, right? They have to defend bomb site A and bomb site B, because they don't know, it's closed information, where the terrorists are going to go. Meanwhile, the terrorists have initiative on their side, because they can pick A or B, or they can try to fake going like A, right? Send like two people A, like fake it so that B players start rotating up to A to defend it, right? Because they think that that's what's being attacked, and then they sneak in and get B or something, right? There's already you can see a lot of nuance and mind games between how you play both sites, right? But there's also, right, if they were symmetrical sites, that would be one thing. But generally speaking, if I recall, A is going to be, on most maps at least, easier to attack than B. So, and because it's 5v5, so you might throw 3 players at A and 2 players on B, right? Because B is easier to defend. But then if you've got less players there, it's harder to defend because you've got less players. And so the geometry of the map becomes deeply, deeply important because of the simple premise, right? It'd be like, imagine if soccer, right, has a very simple map, so to speak, right? It's a pitch, right? It's just flat land. It's supposed to be as flat as possible. But imagine if we just started erecting walls, right, in our soccer map, all right? That would really complicate the game. And that's part of where Dota 2 gets our Counter-Strike. I don't know why I said Dota. I think I'm in Valve mind, right? Like Valve. But that's part of where Counter-Strike gets its complexity, is because if in a competitive game, you're usually playing a best of 3 or a best of 5, where you have to play multiple maps. And some teams will be better on some maps and other things like that, right? So because I think generally speaking, more simple games in terms of like rule structure allow themselves to kind of flower out in unique possibilities with something like maps, right? As opposed to like what we might see in a MOBA like League of Legends or Dota, where the variety between games instead of the maps comes from the heroes being played, right? Right, you're always playing in the same map in Dota 2, but this last game I was Rubik, this game I'm Disruptor, next game I'll be Bristleback, right? I'm changing, and that's like the contingency, right? That's the thing that's changing between different games. And so that's our brief overview of the rules. Any questions like at our start of like the design of Counter-Strike?
No, I don't have any questions. I just feel like this might be getting ahead of things, but Counter-Strike also has, like, in the way that you described, like flowering out, it has these additional things like the complex economy, the buy system, which I assume is where we're going next. But yeah,
definitely. I think that is generally speaking where we're going next. I have 2 big subheadings for this one, which is rounds and excitement, which is talking about like the structure of like the play and the rules. And then the second point is player choice. Like, how does this game kind of where do players have choice in this game? Excuse me. But I just want to get across that, and I think you've got it, I'm sure everyone at home's got it. The premise is quite simple, right? 2 teams, one's trying to plant a bomb, one's trying to stop the other team from planting a bomb. And then after 15 rounds, and this is also, which is really important, like the round structure, you swap, right? And then you redo it from the other side. Now, The last thing I'll note is that yeah. So I want to just note the natural imbalance in the game, which is that which I kind of hinted at, but the terrorists know where they're going to go, right? So they, generally speaking, will have a man advantage, but it's harder to move, and it's because of the way that corners work in shooters. It is better to be defending, right? To be like holding your gun at a corner, waiting for someone to come, right, and then to shoot them, right? Than it is to be the person moving and then shoot. And this gets to one of the more, well, we'll now talk where the game kind of slowly becomes more and more complex, like the further we look at it, is that when you're moving in the game, you do not have perfect aim, which is the case for like Overwatch or in lots of other games, right? If your reticle is on something in Overwatch, let's say you're Widow, and you're flying through the air like you just grappled, right? And you point your cursor at something and you take a shot, you will hit that target exactly where you fired, right? Mm-hmm. In Counter-Strike, this is not the case. In Counter-Strike, if you are moving, your shots like will randomly just shoot wherever. In fact, it's like very hard to hit a target if you are moving at all. So generally speaking, what you'll see is as people who play Counter-Strike will play Shift is the walk button, and Control will be the crouch button. And so what you'll see a lot of times is that players, when they fire, they'll press Shift or Control because that'll slow them down and make them more accurate in their firing. And so because of that, like, kind of quirky little rule, right, which reflects real life, like imagine trying to shoot a gun while running or shooting a gun while standing still. Suddenly, like, the possibility for defense becomes like better, because like in theory you'd think if it was perfect aim, the terrorists would have an advantage because they could poke the corner because they know when they're going to come across the corner, right, and then they can shoot, whereas the other team doesn't know like the exact second that they're going to, right, like bolt across and come into view. But because they have to then stop after moving in, it's harder to attack, it's harder to come across the corner. So if we're looking at Dust 2, we'll look at A here. Right, we've got there's what's called a long, and a long is where like there's like it's pretty like it's kind of self-explanatory, right? But a long is where we've got like, you know, a very like a corridor, right, that's quite long, and thus
like a long sight range.
Yeah, a long, that's a good way to put it, like a long sight range. We've got that on A. We've got the long on A here, and so what that means is like a player could, you know, sit up here, and then they could hold their gun, and then they can wait for someone to come across this corner and shoot, right? As opposed to like what we see in the middle of the map, where there's a lot of corners, right? And corners are inherently tricky because you never know what's around the corner when you walk through, and so that can complicate things to some degree. But
it's interesting too because like the slowing down mechanic in this game is actually one of the reasons that I find it so frustrating to play. Because it is very specific to this game. Yes, most shooters have the thing where it's like if you're running, obviously you're not going to be as accurate. I find that you're right. In Counter-Strike, it is nearly impossible to be accurate if you're moving at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to watch gameplay of this, where they're doing, you know, the bomb defusal kind of mode. And then to see that replicated in other games that have since taken that up and like really run with it. I mean, the Call of Duty League is almost entirely search and destroy, which is what they call this mode. But they don't have that mechanic, and they really don't sort of encourage or enforce slower methodical movement in the same way that Counter-Strike does. Mm-hmm. So I'm really curious about how, and I'm not really sure how deep we can get into it, you know, at first glance, but I'm curious about how that kind of slow pacing really affects the way that this works as a competitive title. You know, following up with what you were talking about, like with the rounds and how that's kind of how excitement is generated. I'm not really sure about how exactly all those things are connected, but I do find it really interesting that Counter-Strike is as successful as it is, but it really encourages that slow movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely encourages thoughtful and tactical play. It's like, I think it's reasonable to say of Counter-Strike that while certainly technical skill is of great importance, right? Like, you know, being able to move your cursor and hit somebody, right? Like, and take them out is like, of course, it's like, it is the premium skill that you need to play a competitive shooter. I think there is also a very high premium in Counter-Strike on your tactics. which gets us into how is their tactics in this game, right? The danger, of course, when you develop something like this, right, is that every round is going to play out exactly the same, right? Like, you know, the terrorists will send 3 to A and 2 to B, and no matter which one the terrorists pick, or the CT, well, we're gonna call them CTs now, and terrorists. The CTs, counter-terrorists, you know, no matter which side the terrorists will pick, it generally will just play out the same way. That's where the economy and the weapon set comes into play. So Counter-Strike has a very kind of strict, I guess we could call it, way that you acquire weapons and utility items like grenades, which is that you have to purchase them in a shop before the round starts. Once the round starts, you cannot purchase anymore, and you get money in a couple of ways. A, you get like a small amount just because it's a round, like a new round, you get a small amount of money. 2, you get an amount for getting kills. 3, you get an amount for planting the bomb or winning the round, right? So you get the winner gets a little extra money. And then finally, there's like kind of like what we call like a pity bonus, right? So if you've lost a couple rounds in a row, you get additional money, right, as a comeback mechanic, right? But what helps make the rounds really distinct from each other is that, typically speaking, what you'll find if you're watching competitive Counter-Strike is the commentators will use words like full buy and half buy. A full buy is where your team had enough money in this round. And the last thing, money carries over between rounds, so you can throw away a round by saying I'm not going to spend any money, and you have more money next round, right? But anyway, so a full buy is a round where your team had enough money and everyone on the team or most of the team bought everything, right? They bought utility like grenades, they bought the gun that they needed, etc. Oh, another thing, weapons carry over between rounds too. So if you have a weapon, you'll have it for next round as well. So obviously there's a lot of favor for the winner, right? Because if they were already leading in money and weapons and then they won, then they get to keep leading in money and weapons, right?
So if you lose your weapons, right?
Yes, if you die, you lose your weapons. If you lose the round, but you live, which happens actually, you know, at least a couple times a game, right? Where you're like, my team can't plant the bomb, right? Or they planted the bomb, I'm the only guy left, I can't contest this. It's better for you to, instead of contesting, sack the round and hide, right? Let them plant the bomb, let the bomb explode, and then you get to keep your weapon. And so all of those things make the economy very complex. Like who has what every round is very interesting, right? And it ends up creating like these really interesting game states where, for instance, maybe the terrorists have very little money, right? But you know, they don't want to just completely lose around, so they half buy, right? So they don't spend all their money, right? They spend maybe half their money, or you know, something like that. And they only buy like worse weapons, or weapons that like a great example of this is the Deagle, which is like the Desert Eagle. The Desert Eagle is like one of the only weapons that can, I think, one-shot somebody through head armor, right? So if you get a headshot with the Deagle, it has a low like fire rate, right? Like it's like boom, boom, right? As opposed to like a machine gun, which is like right. But the Deagle, if you get a headshot, it will just knock somebody out. So you could, in theory, if you're just hoping to like luck your way through a round, right? You buy some Deagles, you rush at a thing, and you just try to get some headshots, right? So your opponent is like outguns you because they have machine guns, but if you get like one hit, right, they can't fire because they're dead, right? So it doesn't matter that they have that machine gun.
How common is that really?
What?
How common is that really? Like a Deagle squad win?
I don't think a full squad would get a Deagle, but what you'll find is that like in like a half buy round, you have 1 or 2 players who run a Deagle instead of having like as an alternative to having like a sniper rifle or something like that.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense.
And then some other people might be buying like the SMG, which is like the submachine gun, which is like which is a lot worse than the rifles, right? The rifles are like the premium weapons, like the AK-47 and the M4A4 and the M4A1. Those are the 3 that you usually see. And then there's the AWP, the AWP, and the AWP is the sniper rifle. Those are I think the most common weapons, but they're also the most expensive weapons. So, but it's really important, of course, to have the best weapon, because that probably is like can really make or break the winning and losing, right, in a lot of games. And so what makes the game, part of what makes the game really interesting to watch is that every round the dynamic between the teams is really different. And as a spectator, here's the crazy thing: you never know if you're playing the game what your opponent bought. Right? So you if you're good at the game, you probably have a gist of what their economy is, right? How much money they generally have. But you don't know if they did a no-buy round or what's called an economy round. Economy round is typically where the terrorists or the CTs just sack the round. They're like, we're going to lose this one. We're not going to purchase anything, or we're going to purchase like one smoke grenade, right? Nothing really consequential. And it's always crazy because once in a while, someone will just win an economy round, right? Like, because they still play it out, right? Even though one team is like, vastly inferior, they could still hit their shots, right? And that's just part of where the imbalance of the two sites comes in. Because just because we have an imbalance in economy, well, the terrorists, all 5 of them are going to A, and you only got 3 people to defend. So, and I can pick up your weapons, which means, again, we get 2 kills really quick. We pick up your machine guns and start shooting them at you, right? Like, and so the game, it's just it's a really beautiful game in that sense, right? Because it's extremely dynamic between round to round. Because of the economy, and that doesn't even get into yet the utility of the game and the mind games that you can play with it. So there's grenades in the game, of course. There's 4 primary grenades, and what's funny is that compared to other games like Halo or something, the grenade system is probably going to shock you a little bit. Unless you played a significant amount of Counter-Strike. But there's 4 grenades. There's the flashbang, the smoke, the incendiary, and the frag. Now, if I were to ask you which one do you think is the most consequential, what would you say? Just like based on your experience playing shooters.
Did you say, was there a concussive one, like a flash?
Flash was the first one I said.
I would say flash or smoke, probably.
All right. Yeah, you got it. I would say from playing like lots of Halo and stuff, right? They're like smoke grenades don't even exist in that game, right? There's just frags, basically, right? Like a lot of games, they just have different kinds of frag grenades, right?
Looking at you, Valorant.
But in Counter-Strike, frags can be useful, of course, because they're damaged, right? Like, but smoke is probably the most important, and then flash is probably the second most. I think it's kind of hard to quantify like which one is the most important, but smokes are really useful because they can act as a delaying mechanism. They have just a lot of there's a lot of possibility you can do with a smoke because it completely obscures vision. And if someone tries to run through smoke, they're at a huge disadvantage because typically someone moving through smoke can be seen on the other side before they can see someone else, right? So like, it's like moving through the a corner or something. But what that does is because there are often multiple paths to each objective, the smoke, right, can force the opponent to funnel through a different way. If they're looking to attack, it delays them. There's a lot of things you can do with that. Or as a great example, if you are planting the bomb, right, it takes a little time to plant a bomb. It takes like 5 seconds. You throw a smoke down on your position, they don't know where you are in the smoke, right? They can pepper it with gunfire, but they're not necessarily, they don't know where you are, right? And then you get the bomb planted. And so there's a lot of possibility with smoke, but same thing with incendiary, right? You can do the inverse, right? Oh shoot, they're about to plant the bomb. I'll toss an incendiary grenade on the point where they have to plant it, and now they can't because they'll die to the fire. Flashbang is of course useful, as you kind of hinted at, is because it momentarily blinds somebody, but only if they're looking. But this is where the mind games come in, right? You throw a flash, the other team, if they're good, they'll look away. But if they're looking away, well, guess what? You've just bought yourself an opportunity to come around that corner, right?
Exactly.
And so, like, the utility adds a lot of possibility to the gameplay, right? Like, you could have a team that like says, okay, we're going to go to the long, we're going to throw out a smoke grenade right from the corner where they can't see us, and we're just going to run through the smoke, right, and just see what happens, right? And that can work, right, if you're the economy players, right? And one smoke grenade could completely change the strategy of like what it means to approach this objective. And so Counter-Strike is generally, I think, a really interesting game to watch because of like that. But also, continuing our discussion, I think part of what makes Counter-Strike, in my opinion, maybe the best esport for somebody who's never watched an esport before is that the rounds have a very simple narrative of complex to simple. Every round has this happen because you start out with 10 players in a round, but slowly they die and then they're not on the map. So what happens is you start out with 10 players and you're mostly focused on the map at first. Like, oh, it looks like the terrorists are going towards B, right? Oh, they're taking this pathing. Oh, they threw this grenade, right? You're keeping track of there's 2 people defending me, right? You're taking track of a lot of stuff. But then suddenly they attack. And then there's this moment of action. And let's say the terrorists win. They take out the 2 CTs, but they lose 3 in the progress. Now it's 2v3, but the terrorists have planted the bomb. Now the game is even simpler, right? Now there's only 5 players in the game. Then there's some interaction. Maybe a CT gets a T, and then there's a trade back. Now there's only 3 players in the game, right? 1 terrorist, 2 counter terrorists, or something like that, right? And then then maybe it's a 1v1, right? And then finally that 1v1 becomes 0v1. Sometimes it's a 5v0, right? It's a blowout, right? Nobody dies. But typically you're going to have a couple deaths around, and it's going to slowly get simpler as to what the action is and who has to accomplish what, right? Like the bomb is planted, there's 1 CT left, he has to go kill the 1 terrorist and defuse the bomb, right? It's like really clear what you're watching. And that's where what we call clutches, right? A clutch is where a player succeeds in like a 1v2 or something like that, right? Round. And that is, I think, part of what makes Counter-Strike so alluring, right? Such a game where people who love Counter-Strike, I think they're like, it is their game, right? They don't play anything else, right? Because they're into Counter-Strike. It's because the rounds have this really exciting rhythm to them of going from like, okay, what's our original tactic and strategy, and then slowly it's becoming more about like, can this one person do the one thing that they have to do, or will the other person stop them, or the other group of players stop them? And that is always, I think, that is a really exciting way for a game to kind of play out.
Yeah, and what's really useful about it, I think, as a spectator, like you said, is that simple narrative is easy to follow as both a player and a spectator. I mean, is this true? I think it's true. Counter-Strike was the first esport that I ever watched, even though I didn't watch it very much. And having known very little about Counter-Strike, it was still very easy to follow. It's in a lot of ways, as an esport, antithetical to Overwatch, where a lot of the complaints that we've had as spectators of Overwatch League are kind of resolved just in the very simplicity and straightforwardness of Counter-Strike. I don't know the answer to that question. Was CS the first esport at all?
I think it's tricky to define the first esport for a variety of reasons. In particular with CS, I think my gut answer says no. I think describing it as a proto esport would be very fair. And I would say its influence is immense, even if it's not the first technically. StarCraft technically predates Counter-Strike, so you could argue StarCraft, but I would say we had Arcade Month, and then coronavirus happened, where we were able to kind of really significantly show that people have been playing video games like competitively, like as sport, even like Donkey Kong, right? A single player game was competitive as a sport in an arcade, right? And then the same thing with like fighting games, right, which saw their kind of true come to form with Street Fighter 2, which was in the early 90s, right? And then Mortal Kombat follows that soon thereafter, right? And you could argue that that's the first esport. So, but whether or not Counter-Strike is the first esport, I would say its influence is immense. As we noted, I think it's influenced MOBAs profoundly, but also games like Overwatch are also deeply indebted to Counter-Strike. And I think, as you noted, like most other shooters, borrow heavily from mechanics and general gameplay that Billy Mitchell's the first e-athlete, perhaps. I mean, as we noted in Arcade Month, the first video game is Pong, a strictly competitive game, right? Like it's like 1v1 competitive. But that's a great question, Ryan. But to get back to what Janelle's saying is like, yeah, like one of the things that makes, I think, Counter-Strike really engaging is because it's very simple, and that's actually very much in contrast to a lot of other games. And again, one thing I'll note is that, and this is I think obvious, but we haven't explicitly stated it. All characters or like avatars in the game are equally competent, if that makes sense, right? Like they're like, it's not like you can pick fast guy and he runs faster than everyone else, right? Every character in the game has the same model, at least from the perspective of headshotting and everything like that, right? Like they'll have like, you know, like if you're the terrorist, you look different than the counter terrorist, right? And even,
but it's just right.
yeah, it's just cosmetic. It's not right. Yeah, you're not actually moving faster or anything like that. And so, but yeah, so we are, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I think that like Overwatch is a game where it's 6v6, and not only that, but we don't have this simplification of the game, right? As a round continues, because everyone's always respawning, right? I'm pretty sure like you'd have to have like a supercomputer brain, right, to be able to track all 12 players at any given time, right?
Especially because all of them are playing with different objectives. There isn't a shared singular objective that everyone can execute competently, because all the heroes are slated in a way that they complement one another, right? So I think this was a conversation between you, me, and Dave when we were talking about this months ago. And one of the main complaints that we had as spectators of Overwatch League was that it is impossible to truly know what's happening and what is the most important or clearest narrative to privilege as a spectator, as a viewer, or as someone that's actually like creating this for someone. Like you said, there's 12 people on there and they are constantly coming back, as opposed to something like Counter-Strike, where it's this very closed, clear story. Exactly. It was a straight up clusterfuck. And this is a clusterfuck of a different kind. I think this one is at least like discernible. As I'm watching, say like, what was it? Like DreamHack or something. I know that probably what I'm seeing is the most important thing going on in the map right now. I don't have to wonder what kind of crazy stuff is happening, you know, halfway across the map, because everybody is doing the same thing together as a group.
Yeah, and that's a great way to kind of look at it and kind of discuss it, right? Because yeah, I think video games in general have, and I don't want to be mean, because like I am a guy who loves games, and I run a show where we talk about esports, but esports have a propensity to get more and more complex, right? Over time, right? Like look at MOBAs, right? Even like I was actually just looking at this the other day, but Dota 2, right, started out with like 30 heroes, and now it's like over 100 something, right? So like this game, like even if the map is staying the same, is like constantly changing a lot, right? And then there's like all these items in the game, and the items are always changing too. And so like video games have this propensity towards really like complexity, right? Like because code can be really easily manipulated, right? As opposed to like with soccer or football, where it's like the rules are like pretty set in stone, and it's more about the physical attributes of the talents of the players, right? And Counter-Strike, I think it's closer to that than something like Overwatch League or maybe even, or like any hero-based game. I think Valorant is like this too, even though Valorant is a Counter-Strike clone to some degree. Overwatch, Valorant, Dota, League, all these games where like your actual abilities change every game, right? It'd be like imagining playing football and then saying, well, this time we're banning your left leg, you don't get to use it this game. You know what I mean? Like, right? Nope. Like you're like changing the rules of like the engagement before the game even starts with a lot of these games because of who is selected. Whereas with Counter-Strike or soccer or even like StarCraft, the rules are set in stone. You know what they'll be 10 days before the competition, right? Generally speaking. And at times there'll be changes to like the guns or something like that. But again, guns are available to both teams. Which actually gets me into a little bit of a further point. I just want to make sure I don't want to say, I think Overwatch does need more editing than Counter-Strike does, right? And the problem is I think that they tried to emulate a little bit of Counter-Strike's success, because I think regardless of whether you like or I like Counter-Strike or not, it is the most successful FPS esport in terms of viewership and lasting power, right? So like Counter-Strike has been in the esports zeitgeist, right, for 15, 20 years, right? Like, even if it hasn't been number one the whole time, it's been number one most of the time.
But what's like really remarkable about that is that there's been, to my knowledge, at least like very little change within the game itself. The rules have been set, like you said, for a long time. I guess they have like cosmetic stuff that they release now that they seem to have kind of switched up how they're doing that. But really, the game has been, as far as I understand, exactly as it is now for most of that time.
And I think, and that's why I think it's an interesting poster child for I think Ryan brought up a good point, which we'll get to in a sec. But I think it's a good poster child for Game Design Month because I think it's very beautifully designed and simply designed, right? As opposed to, like, not to pick on, Blizzard too much today, but Overwatch, right? Which is just a very complex game, right? It's a game where you can switch heroes mid-match, right? Like, so it's like you can't, it's like one moment you're playing against Reinhardt, and then that player is now playing Widowmaker, right? Like, and now the whole thing has changed, right? You're in the middle, and that's fine, right? And that's not necessarily bad, but you can see it's a game that has just so many moving parts, as opposed to Counter-Strike, which has fewer moving parts, but those moving parts are so well crafted that it doesn't have to be something else, right? Soccer, same deal, right? Soccer doesn't have to try to be anything else because, right, there's enough beauty and complexity in the base rules of soccer to keep it as an engaging game for forever, right?
Exactly. Where Counter-Strike, I think, thrives on its simplicity, Overwatch in a lot of ways has suffered because of how complex it became. I mean, I agree. What does it say about a sport in which liveness is a detriment to the viewing experience? I mean, my short answer is, like, if liveness is a critical element of that game and of the viewing experience of that game, where, that's not something that people want to compromise on, people being the individuals organizing this esport, then something else needs to change. Because it's very clear from both viewership statistics and then just audience participation in general, people aren't very happy with the way that Overwatch League is sharing things and the way that the game itself lends itself to an esport format. And I think that there's been a lot of, hubbub about changing things for the better, for the betterment of the sport itself. But I feel like it's just too complex of a game as it stands if they're going to just use the same, like the kind of competitive mode and just say, well, now it's an esport. If they want it to really contend as a live form of entertainment, then they need to change something else so that it lends itself to that format. Just in its natural state, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think all, like, spectator sports, right? Like, and this I hope this doesn't seem like a reaching conclusion, but the way that they are presented to what's the word I'm looking for? Presented to an audience is that they are simplified, right? So the question becomes, how can you simplify this game, right? Which sounds actually almost misleading or wrong at first glance, right? Because imagine if I were to tell you, well, okay, so hey, Play Scholar, so if I were to tell you, like, you know what I mean, like, as, like, let's say we were about to stream some StarCraft, and let's say, or you were to come up to me, right, and you were to say, all right, Eric, I want you to just talk about StarCraft, really explain it to the audience, and the most important thing that I need you to do, though, is simplify it, right? You'd be like, but the beauty of the game is how complex it is, right? The beauty of soccer, the beauty of Counter-Strike, the beauty of like most sports, of most things, is in their complexity, right? And how things come together, right? And that's the thing that that's the problem with Overwatch, right? Is like tell somebody, all right, I want you to take Overwatch, this game of 6v6, I want you to simplify it so that an audience can understand what's going on. And what you find is that even the most knowledgeable people about this game struggle to really simplify it to the point where an audience can understand it. And from a visual perspective, right, it's the same dealio, right? It's like, how, like, visually, like, what can the camera operator do, right? The person who's choosing what the audience sees do to simplify the action. And one of the issues that we have, right, is that the best they can do, generally speaking, seems to be to put yourself in the perspective of like a sniper, right, or like a Widowmaker or a Hanzo, because they're seeing more of the field of the battle. But if that's the best you can do, that's frankly not that good, right?
Especially because the reason that they'll go to someone like a Widow or a Hanzo is because you have a singular objective that's very clear. Click head equal you're doing your job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very simple to follow that, and that objective doesn't really change at that level of play. There's a very specific reason that someone is playing that character, no matter what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And
So
this
that's
is...
easy to
Oh, go
follow.
ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish what your thought, and then I'll go to mine.
I was going to say it makes it really easy to follow. And I think that what's most telling about how the game doesn't really lend itself to that format is the fact that they tried to commodify that viewing experience and be like, all right, so there's no way that our cameramen and editors can possibly share this game in a way that makes sense. However, if you pay $15, you can do it yourself.
Big mistake, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It was ridiculous, but it showed that's like even the best thing that we can offer for actual currency is that you watch one player and only see what they are doing. That's the best that we can offer you, or some kind of like Back to the Future series of 7 different screens of your choice.
Yeah, and this is why even from the very beginning I was a proponent that the Overwatch League, and I don't want to like toot my own horn. I think I did say this on stream like a year ago, but it doesn't really matter. I've been a big proponent that Overwatch might be the first esport where the main way that you watch Overwatch as a competitive title or an esport is different than the way that you play it, as opposed to like every other esport, right? Like StarCraft or a Dota or a League, right? You already have a top-down view when you're playing, right? So like you just kind of modify that a little bit, and then you're still like in the top-down view of a player, right, while watching. And it's the same deal with like a Counter-Strike, right? Sometimes they'll pull out and show like a freestanding camera, right? That's typically like just at the start of the round to show you the team moving through, right? Not when there's actual action. When there's actual action, they just show the player's perspective. But Overwatch, there's too much, right, for one player's perspective to really capture it. And so I've always felt like with Overwatch, they needed to have like zoomed out, like kind of maybe not top down, because top down is kind of a boring way to look at something, generally speaking, but like, you know, like free floating cameras that can kind of capture the action not as the players are perceiving it, but from a little bit further away, which is incidentally how all traditional sports are, right? Because we can't watch baseball from the perspective of the pitcher. We just can't, right? We're not going to hook up a camera to the guy's head. So people are used to that. The problem is with esports is there's this innate like tendency, we could call it, that would be dope if they put a camera on the pitcher's head or something so we could see it. But like there's an innate thing with esports, which is that they're also streamed. And so to some degree, the viewing experience, like I think there's a natural inclination from like what we call like tournament organizers, or, you know, like the governing body that's like running these leagues, to kind of keep them like the viewing experience that players are already used to, right? Players are used to watching their favorite Overwatch streamer, right, just stream the game, right? And it's just their perspective. So I think they're a little bit more hesitant, right, to be like, well, we need to actually flip the script on its head and kind of show a new way of viewing it. But I think with a game like Overwatch, like American football or soccer, right, which are games are also too complex to just look at. If I were just looking at Lionel Messi's head the entire game, I would be confused as fuck. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't know what's going on unless he has the ball, right? But so it's the fact that the camera's zoomed out, right, and I see the whole pitch that I can see that. And I think with Overwatch, I think it's pretty similar. Put the camera in the ball. That sounds real. That sounds like a headache. Right at the ball, because the ball's like always spinning, right? But maybe you put the camera in the ball, make the ball translucent, and then the camera has a gravity stabilizer, so that way maybe then.
Oh, there you go.
You know, none of those things exist yet, but you can do that kind of thing, and I think in like Rocket League, right? But let's get back. We can get back to Counter-Strike, I suppose, a little bit. But that's a word on why complexity is hard, right? It's because like it's not just that like something's complex and thus no one can understand it, because I think people who are watching Overwatch League generally understand Overwatch, right? They know what all the heroes do, they know the layout of the maps, right? But how do you capture that action and simplify it in a way that an audience is like, yes, I understand what just happened? And that's the tricky thing, right? It's a lot easier in a fighting game, right? A 1v1 game where all the action is on the screen, right?
Right.
as opposed to an Overwatch, right? And part of that's why a game like Overwatch is new, fresh, and exciting when it comes out, right? It's because it's these, they're because of all this complexity, so much to dig around and to explore, but that also creates problems.
Mm-hmm.
So back to we actually have covered a lot of in a roundabout ways we've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover about Counter-Strike. So what I thought would be fun is I actually have like a bunch of different maps from Counter-Strike, and I kind of want to talk about why the maps kind of matter, because I think again, like there's a natural inclination to say, well, the better team's just always going to win, right? And we've already shown that with utilities and with like the way that they impact like the play of the game, right, and the way tactics work, is that like it's harder to define exactly who's the better team, but also teams are going to be better at different maps because they're better practiced on them, especially because of the way that Counter-Strike does maps is that typically what you'll do is a team will ban 2 maps, the other team will ban 2 maps, then there'll be, I think, like on ban one, and then like it's like pick the last of the 3, right? There's like 7 maps available and you end up picking only 3. I think it's ban 2, and then pick. I don't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head. It's been a little while since I've So yeah, I agree with Play Scholar that the map does definitely impact who wins. And so I pulled up all these maps, and I kind of want to just talk about how like the map like impacts play and really makes Counter-Strike an exciting game from that perspective, right? Like, why would, like, let's say you just watched, I don't know, FaZe versus Virtus Pro, right? And they just played on Cache, and now they're moving to Inferno. Why should you care, right? Like, why, like, you know what I mean? Like, you just saw FaZe win. Aren't they just going to win again? Like, and so I think it's interesting to talk about the maps and how they impact it. So let's look at Dust 2, and I want to do like a simple kind of map analysis of Dust 2. And then I'm going to do the same thing for Inferno, because Inferno is probably my favorite map. Inferno is really interesting. So can you see kind of Dust 2 here on my screen? Yep. So we've got the CTs who start on the left and the terrorists who start on the right. And now we can see that there's 3 primary paths we're going to start on the terrorist side that the terrorists can take to all 3 objectives, right? You've got this way up to the top, which is this long, right, that we see here. And then we've got what we call here, which is doors. I don't know if these are the official terms. Like, there's actually literally official terms for every square inch of this map. Let me see if I can. I saw a map like it earlier, but I can't pull it up right now. But basically, like, you can see like a map of Dust 2 where like every single like area has its own name. A great example of this is on Nuke. There's a door here that squeaks when you open it, and so that door is just called Squeaky, and that area is called Squeaky, right? And so like if you say like they're at Squeaky, right, your teammate who is knowledgeable will instantly know what you're talking about, like where they are, which shows like the level of the depth of knowledge that people have of these maps, right? That they have nicknamed every portion of the map for ease of communication between people. But we see that the terrorists can go up the top here, and we see that there's this doors section, which is like the first kind of obstacle we might describe for the terrorists. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit on it, and the problem is that you can't really see what's around the corner while you're going through these doors. You see like you can't move these doors; they're just like these like slants like this, and you have to kind of like walk through them. And so that's like our first kind of like thing, and then there's like kind of a more open area, but there is boxes here, and in theory, like if somebody was coming around this way, you could hide behind this box here and shoot them, or if someone's coming around this way, you could hide around this corner here and shoot them in the back as they're running through, right? So already like the architecture here is kind of interesting. And what's important to note is runtime is like deeply important, right? Because for instance, you like both teams start out at there's not like a preparation period for the counter terrorists. When the round starts, everyone is free to move, like the moment the round starts. So you can only get so far if you're running to try to get to a place. But no matter how fast the terrorists kind of move, I'm pretty sure counter-terrorists can always get into this kind of corner, right? So you always have to kind of check the corner as you're kind of moving around to make sure, right? Check your, Now right here, this is like this little area right here is like actually like a ramp that goes down. And so again, this is another place where a CT could hide and then pop their head up when like the other team is like kind of coming around the bend. And so, but this is one path to A, right? It's kind of come up through here, go through the doors, go up the long, and then go up here and plant the bomb. And note that the verticality of the map is a little bit missing here. Fortunately, Dust isn't the most vertical map. Like here, the bomb site is kind of elevated above this stuff right here, and this is like a bridge right here, so like it kind of goes down. But suffice to say that this is one path to A, but there's another path to A, which is, I would say, and this is the interesting. It's more dangerous, but that also likely means that it'll be less protected, right? Because your opponent is going to protect your safest path first, right, to the objective, because that's your safest path. And then they'll protect each subsequently more dangerous path will be less protected, which then incentivizes you to possibly take it, right? Because then it's less dangerous because it's less protected. It's like this weird, oh great, PhD Simulator, you pulled up a labeled map. So like this is, which map is this? This is Dust 2, yeah. But yeah, so like, yeah, long, car, cross, A ramp, barrels, goose, default plant, back site, B plat, back plat, right? Outside tunnels, T ramp, T spawn, C spawn, right? Like, right? Very quick things, window, right? Things that you can say really quickly. Thanks for pulling that up. I recommend it. Everyone check that out while I'm talking about this. Actually, I'll use this map to continue my discussion because it'll be a little bit easier. So we'll just note that the map has been flipped right now. Instead of being right to left, it's now down to up, like the direction that the map goes. But now the terrorists could also go down the middle. And then there's catwalk here, or mid, right? And mid, they can go either towards A and take catwalk and short stairs and up towards the A site, or they could take the lower tunnels to the left and then the upper tunnels go towards B. Or if they're feeling really risky, they could go through mid doors and then go left here. Now, why is that probably a dumb decision? Well, the CTs spawn here. They're going to go this way and this way, right? So you're actually running in between them, right, where they should be in order to get to one of the two objectives, right? And so you're asking to be flanked, right? Because if you pick B, the people at A can just shoot you in the back, and if you pick B, the people at B are and vice versa, right? You get shot in the back regardless of which direction you pick, possibly. And so, but you could choose to go down mid, and then you could choose to go this way, or you could choose to go this way, and then finally the terrorists can go. So we see that the terrorists can go towards B, towards ramp, right, towards the outside tunnels to the left. So we see that the three main ones are like the long on A, mid, and then T ramp. The interesting thing about mid is while it's more dangerous, you then have the choice, like the enemy might see you going mid, but then they still don't know if you're going A or B, right? Because there's a pathway from both of them to go towards either. And so the map design of Dust 2 is like, obviously it's kind of an iconic map, right? It's a map that is very popular. But what we can kind of tell is we can see that B is, generally speaking, going to be more dangerous to take. And why is that? Because the terrorists are going to be funneled into a smaller thing. Like, look at the tunnel's exit over here, right? If we're looking at the far right and the far left on this map, the far right is long. It's very wide, right? A whole team can very easily kind of spread out in there, right, and shoot at things in there. Whereas if I'm protecting B, I just have to protect this little choke point that your whole team's going to have to come through, right? It's going to be hard for your team, for instance, to have a big thing is having two targets to shoot at, right? It's a bottleneck. Bottleneck or a choke point, as Ryan points out, right? But it's important, like, to note with like a long, right? Imagine if me and somebody else both pop out of the long corner right here, right? And we're spread out, right? We're this far apart. Well, the enemy doesn't have to choose which one of us to shoot at, right? Because they can't shoot at both of us at the same time, right? So even if they knock out one guy, the other guy shoots him down. But if you have such a narrow choke point or such a narrow bottleneck here, right? B just keeps firing, right? And you're coming in single file, and you all die, right? So B is more dangerous, generally speaking, to kind of approach, because again, as we noted, going through mid is the most dangerous. Doesn't mean never go through mid, right? It means that mid is like not something you want to make a habit of doing, right? Because it's very easy to punish, right? And so,
Or at least not by yourself.
yeah, definitely not, or maybe by yourself because you're trying to sneak, right? One thing we haven't noted about the game design is sound is very crucial in Counter-Strike. You actually really can't listen to music while you play because your footsteps make sounds, and in fact, but walking doesn't make sound. And so, for instance, if there's smoke and you run through it, the opponent's going to hear you running through it and then shoot at you, right? But if you walk through it, they might not hear you, or they won't hear you walking through the smoke or whatever. And so, if you're trying to be sneaky, you want to use that walk function, because otherwise people will hear you and then they'll just shoot you down. That's one of the first things that a new player kind of needs to get a hold of, is you can't just like run everywhere, because like you just blatantly like basically yelling in the microphone, "I'm coming from this corner." You know what I mean? And maybe this is the beauty of the simplicity of the game, right? Is because B is harder to hit, right? And we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but that means you're probably only going to put 2 people on B, right? Because the tunnels are such a hard way to get in to B site. Meanwhile, A, it looks a lot harder to defend, so you're probably gonna put 3 people there. But then terrorists have an advantage, because they're like, well, if we go to B, we only have to deal with 2 instead of 3 people. But then that creates a problem. If terrorists are like, well, we're gonna keep going B, and then they start winning, right? They win like 3 rounds in a row. They rush B, or they go B every single round, right? Then what can the CTs do? They can say, well, they're going B every round. Let's stack it, right? Let's put 4 people there and only 1 person on A, right, or something like that. And then they just get demolished, right? And then then the terrorists have to be like, well, now we have to go back and attack A, right? Because they're stacking B now to beat us, because that was our strategy before. And you can see how there's like those mind games are like really salient. They're really present when even when you're watching the game. You can it's really easy to tell the audience what's happening, right? Like to be like, oh, they think they're going to go B. There's 4 people or 3 people there, right? As opposed to before. Oh, but they're not going B, right? So then we already, before anything's even happened, we already have the context of what's going on. The terrorists are going A, but they fooled the counter terrorists into thinking that they're going B, and thus they have an advantage. And now we see the fight play out, right? And like you see how like the game is kind of simpler to narrate, and the importance of the game is that it is a closed information game, right? That the other team doesn't know what you're going to do until you do it, until you show, until it becomes visible. And that's very similar to a lot of games of this era. But for some reason, I think this is becoming less and less of a common game design decision of closed information. I don't know exactly why. But I guess League and other games do it too. But like I think in like the last 5 years, like Overwatch is not really a closed information game, and technically it is, right? Because your characters are limited in what they can see. But like if you were to start describing a game of Overwatch, you're never like, the enemy doesn't know that they have a Winston on the payload, right? Of course they do.
Absolutely, because you have a constant view of who is playing what.
Yeah. But we can see here, just by describing the map of Dust 2, we can really start to see gameplay patterns start to emerge out of the map, right? But I think we don't fully understand the nuance until we compare it to another map. So let's look at Inferno. Now Inferno, unfortunately, we don't have the nicknames thing, but we'll go ahead and we'll look at this. Do you want here? I'll send this image over the chat so that way you have it too. Because I know that like if you're watching the stream, it's gonna be like there's gonna be that delay. So here we've got Inferno. And what's interesting about Inferno is Inferno is like this housing district to the bottom, first of all, which the terrorists can get to a lot quicker than the CTs, because the CTs are starting way over here. So like this is all terrorist zone, right at the bottom, like this first little area that we see the terrorists kind of going through. And then we see that again. We see there's two good paths to A. There's actually 3. Well, there's 2 good paths and 1 really bad path to A. And then there's 1 path to B, kind of similar to what we saw in the last game, or in Dust, where was really 1 path to B, one general path to B. We'll get into the nuance of it. And then there was 2 paths to A, which makes A more appealing, but also more likely to be heavily defended. So let's talk about Inferno. First of all, let's talk about Inferno's B, because I love Inferno's B site. So Inferno's B site is the one that's easier to run to, because we can see here the distance between the terrorist site and A is quite far. They have to run through this entire housing district to get there, right? And we see that there's like a long here that the terrorists can get to before the CT scan. So it's a little bit dangerous, right? Especially to come through like this area right here. Like it's very easy. Like if you pop out here, you don't know if the enemy is gonna be here or there. So like, right, there's a lot of danger here. But if the terrorists just run B, they can get like up to here by the time the terrorists are getting into position here. So it's already rush B is already pretty interesting on Inferno. But what makes it really compelling is like so many great games of Counter-Strike I've seen come down to interesting fights and smokes and, you know, grenades and everything happening in this little segment of the map, because it's such a unique choke point. Because there's like this box here that someone can like hide behind. There's this little cubby hole. Like if you're a counter terrorist, you could run, hide in the cubby hole, wait for them to come across, and then shoot them in the back, right? Like there's a lot of unique like geography right here with like there's like boxes and stuff. And then like look, you can see like something that seems so inconsequential. Like look at, there's a little divot here, right? But a player could also hide behind this divot, wait for someone to come, and then shoot them, right? And the problem is if you're coming up this way, what are you mostly concerned about? Someone over here, someone over here. So if you check your corner, someone pops, shoots you down, right? Or pops, shoots you down here. It's like just this little corner, right? That like pops out, right? Adds a lot of depth to the possible interactions between players, right? And the thing is, though, let's say you've only got 2 players defending B, and 2 rounds in a row, you go B, and there's somebody hiding in this corner, and they shoot you down both times. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to start throwing a grenade in that corner, right? Or something like that to try, you know, to kill that person. And that's what creates like you can't keep doing the same thing in Counter-Strike because the enemy team can always adapt to what you're doing. Like, exactly. And that's what, to me, what I find I get like kind of excited about it, but like it's what makes it such an exciting game to watch is that like the counterplay, like you can't just keep doing the same thing. You like the other team will counter it, because especially in the professional level, right? Like they're really talented players, right? And they're very tactically brilliant. They know how to punish you. So it's always about mixing things up. But then it's always interesting when both teams are trying to mix things up. Then both teams are kind of making a mistake, right? Like if I think that you're here, but you're not, and I'm throwing grenades at it, but then you think that I think that, you know what I mean? Like it's like becomes this unraveling kind of thing.
But it works out really well, especially in the example that you were just using. If somebody has been, you know, kind of camping that corner and keeping an eye on things, the third time and someone throws some kind of grenade, you have now wasted that grenade if they figured out that probably I shouldn't push my luck and keep sitting in the same corner and hope it works a third time. You have now wasted not only that, but whatever currency you spent on it, which feels like a much more devastating move than it would in other shooters, I think, even if they have like the same kind of emphasis on map knowledge.
For sure. And even if it fails, though, there's always the mental tax, right? Last round, they threw an incendiary grenade at that corner. Well, I'm not going to go sit in that corner this round instead, right? So it's like now I can be pretty confident that because I threw that grenade, even though we lost the round, that my opponent probably doesn't want to sit there again, because they know that I know that they like to hang out around there. And so like you know what I mean? Like that's like, to me, that's really beautiful. And that's what makes Counter-Strike kind of a really exciting game to watch, because you get to see in real time the decisions of the players. And just to continue to go back to, you know, because everything's kind of enmeshed and connected, our discussion of complexity to simpleness, right? One of the things that makes that happen is because of the 2 bomb sites, right? So like even if, like let's say, you know, if you only have 2 players defending B, and you know, you've actually simplified the game already if B is what's being attacked, because then you can just watch it from the perspective of the counter terrorists, right? Because then you only have 2 perspectives to take care of, because the A players, they don't matter, they're not anywhere near the battle, right? So like that's another way that the game gets simple even before any action has occurred, right? Because only one of the bomb sites is going to be the site of much action. So let's
a mechanical question real quick.
Is
Counter-Strike one of those games where there's an actual peek function, or is it just, you know, crouch, hold shift, move slowly, look around the corner?
there is no peek function. There's no way to like hook to walls and like kind of like, you know, look over them or anything like that. If you Counter-Strike is a game, and this is why I hate all third-person shooters that are competitive. They are all terrible, and you'll never convince me otherwise, is because being able to peek around corners is stupid. It's in real life, if you want to see something, guess what? You've got to look, right? You've got to poke your head out. It's the same way in Counter-Strike. If you want to see if somebody's over here, you're going to have to look, right? That's the only way you're going to be able to find out. And thus you're exposing yourself and putting yourself, you're vulnerable. And I think that that's more engaging and interesting gameplay than, I mean, like, I think you can get a little frustrated from like a game like PUBG, or like, right, where third person is just inherently better, right? Like, I can just be hiding in a room and just be looking out the window without any consequences, right?
Yep. And the reason that I asked is because for a game that really emphasizes on corner play, not having that function I think is really cool. Whereas something like, what is it? Damn, I bought it and I thought it was Siege, Rainbow Six Siege, which is also a pretty successful title. But the game is centered on an actual peek function. You have to be able to peek any kind of flat surface to be a valuable player of any kind. But I think that it's almost more engaging, if not more exciting, to do that in Counter-Strike because there's no reliable mechanic for it. So you could turn a corner and be very damn sad.
Very often you'll turn a corner and be very damn sad. But yeah, so I love that way of putting it. So to continue, one thing that's always interesting about these maps is there's lots of architecture that doesn't see much play, but then when it does, it's really exciting. Like, for instance, here on B, which is like also I think known as Fountain because there's a water fountain in the middle of B, there's like this weird back rooms. It's like a storage room with a couple boxes. And what's funny is that sometimes if you're like, let's say you're the terrorist and you just took the site, right? And now you know that everyone from A is rotating up. You can go hide in the storage room, right? And pop out and shoot them and stuff like that, right? But if you're defending, right? If you're like defending against the terrorist and you're the counter-terrorist, like hiding in this room doesn't make any sense, right? You have no line of vision, right? You have nothing. There's no advantage really to being in here. And so, like, and it's the same thing with the terrace here, is there's this huge area here, which is like all these like little houses and stuff and like these little alleyways that is practically not very useful, right? It doesn't really matter if you know about this secret way of going around. Well, this one it does, but more importantly, like, you never really worry, like, if you come around this corner here that you're gonna get shot. Well, that's not true. We'll go this corner here and you'll get shot. But let's talk a little bit about A and why I think A is also really engaging and interesting in a way that the Dust 2A isn't, right? So that's not to say Dust 2A isn't interesting, but rather they're interesting in different ways. So Dust 2 has this very long segment of A, right? And then we talked about how it has these doors here which are dangerous to go through, and we talked about there was a couple corners which you could be poked at. But if we go to Inferno and we look at A, we can see that there's some really interesting stuff going on. So again, this doesn't show height very well, and then for Inferno, this is actually makes it a little trickier to describe. But what I want to just make sure that you understand is that this area right here, which is like kind of south and to the left of A, is actually an apartment building that's up. It's like kind of up in the, it's like you climb stairs when you get into this building. Both this door and this door is climbing stairs. And that this area right here, so directly beneath the A is actually a balcony that the terrorist could jump out of. What that means is that if you're coming from the CTs, you actually can't get up here. Right, like the counter-terrorist can get on the balcony and shoot it down at you, but you can't get up on the balcony, at least not easily, and shoot at them. Which is right, that creates an imbalance, right, between the terrorists and the counter-terrorists, between this section of the map. But we can see that there's so we see that there's kind of 3 paths to A in general here. We could argue it's only 2, but I'm gonna go with 3. Oh, did you find Inferno? Oh yeah, thank you, Banana, because it goes towards B. So we've got I like this one too because it does kind of show height a little bit, I think.
Yeah, sorta.
So, but so the CTs, we've got the middle, right, is I think the the obvious first choice for going towards A, right? Because you can go towards the middle, and then you've got two ways around. You can go towards arch side or truck side, right? Which, from your perspective, if you're a terrorist, would be left or right, right? And then you could come around the back, and then you come around long A, and you would be able to plant, or you go down truck side, right, and then you'd be able to plant. And what's worth noting is that the A bomb site is like littered with boxes. So actually, it's very hard if somebody gets there and is planting to stop them, because it's like if you're outside of the boxes, it's hard to shoot in. But what makes that interesting too is that if you are a CT, you could hide in the boxes, and then someone goes to plant, and then you just pop them off, right?
That hurts.
But the problem with going down middle is, like, look at how easy it is for the counter-terrorists to defend middle, right? Whereas on Dust 2, we kind of saw that, like, if you want to shoot down long A, you kind of have to you have to show yourself on long A, right? But what happens on, where did it go? There we go. If you're on close, right? If you're like walking down middle, well, the counter-terrorists could be on arch side here, right? Poking their head out. They could be here on this little divot, right, poking their head out and shooting you as you come down this way. They could also be on truck side, right, or on this corner shooting you. And what's nice is that they are able to get there quick enough to hold the corner, right? And what holding corner means is, like, you're just peeking out of the corner a little bit, right? So that way you can take your shot and then back up, right? You get a kill, right? You're not going to get immediately traded back into, and that's really important, right? If my whole body is exposed and two people come out, even if my chances of killing both of them before one of them kills me is pretty low, right? And so having that corner to retreat to, right, is really crucial. But we can see that middle becomes really dangerous because you can be flanked on both sides, right? And thus the architecture completely changes compared to A on Dust 2, what approaching means. So, but you might say to yourself, well, then what I can do as a terrorist is that I can come on down. I can go up these stairs, and I can go down the long hall here and go on the balcony and hop down, or I could go down these stairs. But the problem is if you go down these stairs and come out through here, you're running into the same problem you had kind of with long, right? Where one person could be here shooting at you. But fortunately, what helps is that if somebody's holding this corner and you come out here, you have really good vantage point on them already. You can see them pretty well. And so, but also, what you'll find is that the CTs have just enough time, if they run as fast as they can, to actually get to apartments before the terrorists do. Like, it's a little bit closer. So if the CTs want, they could actually take apartments and hide somebody up here in window, right, and shoot down towards alt middle, or kind of shoot down over here, or go take long haul or something like that. And so there's just like so much nuance to like where could the CTs be on A that makes it hard to attack, but also pretty hard to defend. And I think that like I hope what I've done effectively to some degree is show that that like these two different maps, Dust 2 and Inferno, really play out a lot differently from each other, even though the rules of the game are the same, right? The guns that you have are the same, your characters are the same speed, right? Everything, all those things are the same, but the map just can completely change the dynamic between the two teams.
And so two things. One is a tactical question. Is there anything like a remote explosive in the game aside from the thing that you're planting, but like anything like a claymore or something you could set behind you?
No, not really. There's grenades, but that's about it.
I find that really interesting because my gut as a person that plays a lot of shooters would be hole up somewhere, defend it as best you can, that gives you some kind of useful vantage point. But this kind of makes that altogether impossible to truly defend yourself and have some kind of secure position. So it does seem to, in a way, kind of emphasize constant movement. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely.
And to your thing about the maps, I think for me as someone that studies environments and games especially, I really like that because it emphasizes that everything can stay the same, but the environment is truly one of the greatest modifiers of a game game experience.
Yeah,
of what
context.
play is like. Yeah, the environmental context.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I think that's a really well put way of like describing what we've been talking about for a while. Yeah, I think to kind of go to your point about the like remote explosives for a little bit more, the utility ends up being so deeply important. And what's interesting is that Counter-Strike players are some of just the most ingenious users of utility. So you have someone in chat, if they know for sure, they can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure there are 3 throws. Like you can do a hard throw, a medium throw, and then like a lob, right? Like a short throw, right? And what's interesting is that I'm making this one up, but one thing that a player can do is they could be like on T ramp down here, and maybe like they could jump on like a box there, and then they could throw a grenade and it could land way over here where they can't even see, and throw it and like smoke middle or something like that, right? And the thing is if you've smoked middle, you've created a lot of ambiguity for your opponent. And the thing is you got to smoke middle without even going near it, right? So you could even smoke middle and then go B, right? Like, or something crazy like that, right? Like confuse them. And so but like they're so ingenious. Like there's like, if you just look up, like if I just go on YouTube and I look up crazy CSGO smokes, like crazy CSGO smokes, top 10 ESU smokes, or EU
Nice.
smokes for, so EU is Europe. Yeah, let's top 10 EU. So like here we've got one right here, right, where he's like, look at where he is. He's gonna throw this grenade and then look where it goes. And it's gonna land right next to the door and smoke where this is like one of the areas of the CTs want to guard. Right now they can't see. The thing is you just made it so, like I've said with the smoke before, right? If you're moving through the smoke, you can't see, but people can see you running through it. And so what that does is it completely denies that option, right, for the other team. And then it gives you the opportunity to move in, right? Because if you know that they're coming from a certain angle, it's a lot easier. We'll look at the next one here.
That is so ridiculous. I love it.
Like right, like it's like, oh, look at this corner, then look right at that light pole, right, and then throw a hard throw. And now we'll see, where did it land? Landed right there, right, blocking off this whole thing, right? And you did that without showing, without looking at that area, right? And so like it's like the smokes and like and incendiary throws, right? They like, these players are really nuanced in their understanding of the maps, right? And like how the physics of the game impacts the grenades, so they can get the grenade right where they need to, right? And I think that is awesome, right? That's like a really cool thing about the game, is that like there's such a high skill ceiling, even on something just like tactical, like using the grenades, right? It's not just like throw the grenade down the alley, right? It's like there's like specific setups, right? Like I want to throw this, I want to get up here, throw the grenade at the, at the electrical pole, and then it will perfectly, because of the physics systems, block off like a certain area of the map from my opponent. And so yeah, I think the utility play becomes super, super important.
I think one thing that's kind of cool about that as well is that I would imagine the only way that someone could possibly find that out is some kind of social play that's like, I mean, I've done it in Overwatch before with my friends. I bet that I can do this, whatever this might be. I bet I can land a smoke across the map. There's so much social contingency that's really interesting that I think is really only possible because of how long Counter-Strike has been around.
Mm-hmm.
It has such a rich history of sociality that really lends itself to even making those discoveries, let alone perfecting them and using them at the professional level.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. Like these games, right? They continue to develop over time, and like it's like a shared body of knowledge, right? It's like you're stacking, I don't know, hamburgers on a hamburger or something, right? Like every year, like, right, more knowledge is getting stacked onto the hamburger. It's like a lot of times people like try to compare eras of any sport, right? They'll be like, no, like Michael Jordan or so and so could totally crush LeBron James, right? When the fact of the matter is the game has changed so much. You know what I mean? Like, and people have gotten so much better at the game because of collective learning over time that, like, no, I guarantee you, like StarCraft, like players from 10 years ago, no, they may look better for some reason to you, but they are nowhere near as good as players are today, right? Because players today have had so much more time. And that's part of the beauty of any sport, right? Is how it continues to evolve over time. And ideally, as we see in traditional sports, rule changes should really only occur, right? Not to keep the game fresh, which is what we see in like a lot of esports like League of Legends or even Dota to a certain extent, which is like the meta gets stale, right? Or Hearthstone, right? The meta gets stale. We need to inject the game with new cards, new balance changes, right? A great game, right? It's like, oh no, this new strategy is making the game less fun to play and watch, right? Based on just the pure rules that we had before, so we need to change it. Like that'll happen in American football, right? Where they change the extra point so that it's harder to get, because back in the 60s when they introduced the extra point or whatever, right? It was a hard shot for a kicker to make. But now it was so easy, right? There was never a missed extra point, right? There was no doubt in the spectator's mind whether the extra point would get made. So in like 2016 or 2015, they changed the extra point line so that it would it was like 30 yards instead of 10, right? So that way there's a little bit more contingency, right? A little bit more chance that things don't go exactly according to plan, right? And like that's in a sense we could call that a balance change, right? In the NFL. And so, but right, that would be our ideal, right? That the rules are only changing because we want to ensure like the greatest spectator experience or something like that. So what I want to do for the last segment of the show is I thought it would be fun if we took all these concepts that we've kind of talked about in terms of design, right? How rounds go from complex to simple, how there's an economy between rounds, the aspects of player's choice, like do you go to which bomb site do you go to, how do you defend the bomb sites, right? Based on last round, what do you do differently, right? How are you adapting to your opponent's play, right? One thing I want to touch on just a little bit is there actually is a difference in resources between the terrorists and the counter-terrorists. In terms of guns, like the terrorists have access to the AK-47, which the counter-terrorists do not, for instance. Like there's little differences like that. They do play out, I think, significantly in games, but it's an aspect of the design that I think we would do good not to overly analyze for our purposes for Game Design Month. And then we've talked a lot about weapons and utility, right? About what's the difference between, a smoke grenade, how useful is that? How do we use that, right? And we've talked a lot about how, complexity, especially in these games. Let's go ahead. I'm gonna pull up. This is just the grand finals from DreamHack Masters Spring 2020. I haven't watched this, but let's see if we can apply some of these things that we have learned to this game. And so, the first thing so we've got like kind of the beginning of the map. We see the CT spawn there, and it looks like they're waiting for players to get in because so the round just started. So I'm gonna pause it, and what can we see? Well, we can see actually. They do a really good job, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move myself into the middle of the screen, because now we can see the what everyone's bought, right? There's like a little thing on the left and right that shows what everyone has purchased. So we can see utility level. It actually has a little word. This is poor on each one. This isn't part of the game. This is the first round, so people don't have much utility to buy. But we can see that the terrorists who are oh gosh, I'm feeling dumb right now. They're big. They're big. The terrorists are big. They bought one flashbang, one Molotov, which is the incendiary, and 2 smokes, right? And we can see the CT is about one incendiary and 3 flashes. The incendiaries are actually they're different symbols. That's why I got a little confused. And we can see that for the most part, that's pretty much everything. And then body armor. We can see, so body armor is like this this little shield thing that we can see on them. And the body armor is really important because it means it takes more shots to kill you. It's one of the most important things to buy. And so we see that some people bought body armor. And then generally speaking, the people who didn't buy body armor bought utility. So the game is starting, and we see already actually something really interesting happening. It's the first round. Nobody has any money. We see all the CTs are actually running towards B. This is on Mirage, which is a map we didn't really analyze. But they're going to run down mid, and it looks like they're looking for kills, right? They're kind of running as a squad, right? They just have decided that we're not even going to try to protect A, right? Because this is the first round. And there we see that's some corner play, right? So let's look at this. So remember that this is one thing that's mildly important. They can't see the people through the walls like we can, obviously. But we see here that he comes in, he sees the guy, he takes the shot, he gets hit a little bit. Now he's going to hold the corner right where the guy's head is, And then when he pokes his head out, right, he gets the shot. And what's really interesting about this is look at how he holds this corner. I want to... Right here. Right, look at this thin sliver of viewing space, right, that he allows himself, right? Because that makes it harder to shoot him, right? And so it's about that really fast reflex of being able to shoot somebody the moment they pop out of that corner, but without leaving them any room for counterplay if you miss, right? Because it's such a slim, narrow thing. But that already talks about one of the things we've been talking about today, which is corners and their importance in Counter-Strike. And how the architecture, like the fact that there's two corners in this one relatively small space, allows for the player to do this. So he gets the shot off there, and we see that they throw out an incendiary onto B. One player gets in and is hiding behind the van. Again, the architecture being really important. A lot of the players are hanging out here, and all right, so we can see, just for our knowledge, the game is simplifying. There are 2 terrorists alive now, and there's still 4 CTs. Not great. Now, what they got to kill. There's only 1 left. And what is that one guy doing? He's trying to be sneaky. He doesn't have the bomb though, so this isn't great. But he threw a grenade out, right? He's trying to fake out like a certain place, and now he's gonna move back towards B. He's gonna try to get the bomb, I think, primarily, because he can't plant the bomb if he doesn't have it, right? That's one thing to know. Not every terrorist has a bomb. There's only 1 bomb in the game.
And you have to choose who carries it, right? Someone doesn't just spawn with it.
So there, the CTs managed to take round 1. They do a quick replay of the best play, which is, but let's go ahead and we'll go into round 2 now. So now, because of the economy play, we can see that neither team is doing too bad. Actually, no. We can see that for the most part, the terrorists are doing an economy round. Or is it an economy round? I'm trying to look. They're doing that deagle thing I think we were talking about. At least one of them has the deagle. I think a couple of them might. But they have like a sniper. They weren't able to full buy. They spent all their money, but they just have a couple utility, and they bought an AWP, like the sniper rifle. Meanwhile, we can see on the CT side, they weren't able to full buy because it's still only round 2, right? Not a lot of money floating around. Because typically you amass money, right, by winning a couple rounds in a row, right? And then you've because you've started to accumulate more money than you could spend. But we see that the CTs have like a bunch of machine guns and submachine guns, and the Ts don't. So now, if we look at the map, we can see that they've sent 2 towards A and they've sent 3 towards B. Our one player is defending mid. This player in the 2, and then the other guys are spending it over here. So let's continue. They take a shot with AWP. They get him in the leg, which is the one place where the AWP won't insta kill him. They're hugging the corner again. They're hoping to catch somebody there, but nobody's around. All right, and then we come back to A, and it looks like they're kind of pushing up on. Or no, they're pushing up on B here. And yeah, they've got their deagles out. They're hoping to get some good picks, but this guy's got a machine gun.
That's gonna be ugly.
They're peeking around the corners, trying to see if they can catch anybody with their deagle. A smoke comes in. Now it makes it really dangerous to kind of walk through this, so he's going to have to wait a while. Meanwhile, the terrorists have taken middle. And another one of the CTs gets lit up. So now 2 of the CTs are really, this is important to note, they're really low health. And this actually matters because now they don't need to get like a headshot with their deagle, right? They can just shoot them anywhere and they're dead. All right, the CTs get the first kill of the round. But you can see how slow and methodical this is, right? Like they took their time in trying to figure out. There, the CTs managed to get a trade of 2 for 1 around one of the corners. Now the terrorists are they have to get back the bomb because like the CTs are now protecting the bomb, which is not planted. So they're looking around, they're checking all the corners, they're trying to get into position. Oh, and the deagle pops off one of them. I find it funny that you asked about the deagle thing, and then in the second round, like they did go all deagles. They get another deagle headshot. They are going to manage to. They didn't manage to plant the bomb. Like as they were planting it, they got flanked and they got blown up by one of the last players on the other team. Now only 2 players survived. So now the 2 CTs who survived, we can see they already have their utility and they got to keep their guns. But everyone else is going to have to buy back their stuff.
This kind of now, but this lets us talk about the fact that you can buy things for other people, correct?
Yes, that's really
You buy it and
important.
then just drop it for other people.
Yeah, you could like buy a gun and then just you toss it right to another player, right? And then and that's a way that the another way that the economy functions. That way, if one player is getting all the kills on your team, you're not like gimped, right? Like you're
Sure.
as a team. It's a great thing to note. So here we can look and we see full economy round from our terrorists, right? Or almost full economy, right? They have they bought 1 deagle or 2 deagles. Otherwise, everyone's using their starting pistols, and they bought 2 flashbangs, right? So what this means is that and they're going A. We can see by the map. So we can see that there's probably they're going to rush. It looks like, right? They're gonna try to take them by surprise, rush in, and try to do something. But we see what can the CTs do, right? If they think the enemy is going to rush, they could just throw right a bunch of smokes, right? Because then it's like you have to wait, and then your rush strategy has failed.
Right.
Ooh. But we see that we got what looks to be they all rush in, and look at that. This is what we call trigger discipline. I want to note this for a sec. So look what happens. He sees one coming, right? What does he do? He waits. Yep. And then he starts firing, right? Because he wants them all to come down, and then he can shoot more of them before he gets found out. And there we see in the economy round, unfortunately, our T side just isn't able to do anything. Did they even get a kill? That's like they only got 1 kill. So then they transfer a gun to the guy who got the kill, or who got killed, and then they're gonna go back. So.
I feel like an economy round as a counter-terrorist would be easier than an economy round as a terrorist.
Why do you say that?
I think that it's a little easier to have the singular objective of kill someone else even if you have inferior guns than it is, yes, kill everybody on the other team, but also plant the bomb as a backup plan.
I disagree. And the reason why is maybe we're forgetting a little bit the numbers advantage that the terrorist sides will always have, right, in an engagement. So having inferior weapons, well, you can, and it's easier for the terrorists to sacrifice a member or 2 and take an objective than it is for the counter-terrorists to do so, because the counter-terrorists have to spread out, right? Whereas the terrorists, they kind of have to, they can just stick together, right, and all attack a site at once. So generally speaking, I think rushing as 5, even with inferior weapons, is going to be a little bit more advantageous for the terrorists than the counter-terrorists, especially because utility is so important for slowing down the opponent for the counter-terrorists as well. But now we've got probably the last round we'll watch today. But we've got a full buy. Both teams have like full weapons. They have 2 AWPs, right? The sniper rifle. And we can see that the CTs are being what's the word I'm looking for? They're being very economical with their weapons. So like they're not actually all upgraded to the best gun, right? Some of them are still using SMGs. Why? Because they haven't died since the round they bought the SMGs when they were low on money. But those players have the most money on the team, right? So they'll have money next round. Meanwhile, the terrorists we have here, they've lost 3 rounds in a row, so they've accrued a little bit of extra money, and they economied last round. So they're able to full buy here. They have tons of utility, and they all have like the best guns. But they spent all their money. If they lose this round, they're going to be in a hole. So let's see what happens.
Do you know how this turned out in the end?
Nope, I haven't watched this at all.
I'm so curious.
But if anyone wants to watch after stream, it's G2 Esports versus Big Grand Finals DreamHack Europe, or DreamHack Masters Spring. So we see here that the CTs kind of rushed down middle, and it looks like the terrorists rushed down middle, and the CTs were managed to take advantage and pick off 2 of them. And then the terrorists got 1 kill at A, but they lost 1 too. So that's 2v4, right? And now the game is really simple, right? The CTs are way ahead. Like it's 4v1, right? And our 1 player is likely, do they have the bomb? They do have the bomb. So they might still go try and try to do some sort of fake out, right? Because if they can make the game into like a 1v1 and get a plant, they get that bonus money we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Let's see. They're kind of poking around B. They're trying to find anybody, but it's hard, right? It's a wide open area. You can't check everywhere, right? Meanwhile, the enemy knows that you can only come from one way. But he managed to get the kill, and now he's rushing over, and he's going to try to get the plant. Or he fake planted. So when you plant, there's a sound effect. Remember we talked about how sound is really important. So he tried to fake a plant. We'll talk about this. He faked a plant to get the sound effect to get them to rush in, but unfortunately, he still got picked off. But right,
Yep.
that's some of the mind games you can play, right? Oh no, they're planting. I've got to go right now. Oh, they weren't planting, because when you're planting, obviously you can't be shooting.
Right.
And so, but unfortunately, I think he got a 2 with 1 shot, or he almost got 2 with 1 shot there, because the AWP, if you hit like a door or something, it'll ricochet on the other end. It looks like he hit one person, and then they were lined up so perfectly that the AWP hit the other person, didn't kill him, but it made him weaker and easier to pick off. All right.
Gnarly.
Now we have another economy round from the. It looks like this is a half buy from the, or maybe like a low buy from the terrorists, because they bought some grenades and they bought, one person bought a submachine gun and 3 people bought deagles. So they're throwing some grenades. They managed to pick off Hunter a little bit. This is what we were talking about before, right? They've actually where this guy gets hit. Let's look at this. They threw out a bunch of grenades and he gets hit by 2 of them, right? And he gets almost killed. It's because they've been kind of camping that area the past couple rounds. That's why they threw those grenades. That's kind of that counterplay. So then he rushes down. He throws a smoke so that way they can't rush through the area that they just bombarded that he had to retreat from. And now they're going B. Oh, but the CTs are in the apartments. They're firing into the smoke, and we can see it's a lot better. It's a lot better to be firing into the smoke with a machine gun than with a pistol. And a couple players get taken out there. The terrorists are moving in. They're trying. And now there's only 2v5. So right, the game is simplifying. We only really have to follow the 2 terrorists to know where any of the action is going to be. They managed to get a pick. Let's see what happens from here. And there goes the round. 2 final kill. And so we can see just a little bit. We can see how the map architecture, the guns and the economy and the round structure, we can see them all playing even just in this 5 rounds, which turned out to be a very one-sided G2 esports affair for the start here. But with that, do we have any last points we want to make about Counter-Strike before we finish up today's stream?
No, but I think that we did a really good job covering a lot of what has made this such a long-lasting title that's gone on to influence so many other games.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Well, that's Counter-Strike. Next week we'll be back, maybe talking about Civ, maybe talking about something else. But yeah, you guys have a fantastic day out there in the world, wherever you are, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.